Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. For those of you that are working with SQL, the case when query fails, it's not really the end of the world, right? But the problem is when query fails during the times that you are least expecting it. For instance, when you are doing the cast from one type to another one. And this can happen in multiple different steps. And I will try to show you today some of these steps and how to solve it without raising an exception to your upper layer, to layer of your website, to layer of your mobile app that is connecting to the database. Let's right now switch to my database. I will be using Postgres, but the concept will still be the same. I will talk more about some other databases and how to solve it, but let me just try to show you the problem right now and some of these solutions. So here is a simple table, right? We have three columns here. One of them is just an ID that is of type UUID, and the second two columns are of type text and int, right? When we are going to add values into those columns, as you can see, the query was executed successfully here. We do have two records in the database for column type text and column type int, but what is most interesting here is that for column type text, we did actually paste the text here, right? But for column type int, we added for the one row, we added an integer value, which is 100. And for the second row, we added a string value, text value, which is also 100. However, the database managed to successfully automatically convert the type to appropriate type that we defined as a column type for this particular table casting test. And this is a standard behavior for majority of the relational database management systems. And you can check on yours database that you are actually using. I will put some links to the description of this video, but for PostgreSQL that I'm using actually, this is kind of a standard behavior. However, for some of the data types, it won't convert them automatically, meaning that it will try to convert the value to appropriate type, but it will fail with an exception, with an error that I'm not able to save it as a value that you are aiming for, and this is the error that it's generating. So in order to show you this example, let's use the first column, which is this ID of type UUID, right? This particular select that I'm creating here is basically doing a simple select of random values, this particular UUID, test ABC as a column text, and value 100 as column int. This cast will work just fine. We'll get obviously two records because we've added two records, but this cast will work just fine because actually the value here is of type UUID. So everything matches. When select is trying to execute the casting operation, casting to a type of UUID, it will be done successfully because of the fact that this string is of type UUID, can be casted to type UUID. It follows every principle of UUID casting. However, just to show you this particular example, the difference between this and this select is that I've removed last two digits, last two characters from the string. And now when I will do the select, when I will execute the select, I will get an error, invalid input syntax for type UUID, right? So this exactly error that I've copied and pasted here down below. What issues does this bring basically? Imagine that you have the database and you have your upper layer, which is your website or some sort of a CRM database or whatever it would be, right? So if your database is expecting data type UUID and you have an assumption that your front-end layer, whatever would that be, would provide you this UUID, and you don't have any sort of checks on the database before you are saving this information to the database, when the front-end, by any reasons, will send you an invalid UUID, this is the exact error that your database will give back to your upper layers, to your front-end layer or to your back-end layer, however your application is designed, right? And well, still, it's not that bad. However, you need to be prepared, you need to handle those exceptions down the road, right? Now the question is, should you be handling those exceptions and on what layer of your application? Should it be handled on your website layer? Should it be handled on your backend layer? Should it be handled on your database layer with appropriate checks, right? That's another totally separate topic, right? But let's say that you are not able to change your front-end layer, you are not able to change your backend layer. The only place left that you have a possibility to solve it is your database, right? So how can you solve this case? How can you check if the value that you are providing for this UUID is actually a UUID without raising the error? Because this is something that we would like to avoid. So there are two options, at least in Postgres. In other database, there will be different options, and I will show you this one in a second. But in Postgres, you have two options. One option is with using procedural SQL. So you can basically try to execute the statement and you can catch the exception. And in case of the exception will happen, you are going to basically throw an information, send a notice that this is an error. Example, right here. We have a pretty standard pSQL block where we are trying to do the insert into the table casting test. And in case of an exception, in this case, invalid text representation exception, because this is actually the error that is happening behind the scenes, 22p02, we are raising the notice with information called invalid type exception. Now, when we try to execute this one, as you can see in output, I do have an information that we've caught invalid type conversion here, down here, right? So the query did not fail to the front end as it did previously. However, it still did not execute the insert statement. That's another topic. However, it did not throw the error. The error was caught in this exception block. It is a partial resolution. Let's agree on this one. However, how to actually mitigate this problem and check it without using procedural SQL? So without just plain SQL. I don't know procedural SQL, let's assume. I don't have the possibility to use it. Show me how can I do it in plain SQL. So yeah, here we need to help ourselves with regrets. I was meant to say regex. So regex expressions are basically the go-to solutions in this case for solving this type of problems in PostgreSQL. I will mention other database in a second. So what we are doing here actually, so we are comparing with basically regex matching. If the value that we are providing, so in case this value and this value is of type UUID, and this is the exact regex that is validating your UUID type. So what we are going to have at the end after executing this SQL? So we are going to get two values. First one is null, and the second one is actually a UUID that is valid UUID. What has happened behind the scenes? The query took first value, tried to execute it with an information whether it is valid or not, and then this is done in the common table expression. And then when you are doing the select, we are just basically doing a case statement. So case when is valid. So when this particular output of this regex matching is valid, so it is either true or false at the end of the day. So when it is true, then we are sending back the value and we are casting here to UUID. This is the form of a casting, short form for a casting for inside of PostgreSQL. Same would be cast as UUID. This would give us basically the same results, right? And if it is actually valid UUID, we are basically doing a cast to UUID without any sort of problems. And at the end of the day, this value represented here in the result statement of a select is of type UUID. However, when the validation is false, right? So when the provided value here is not a valid UUID, we are going to get null because we don't have any else statement here. Thus the default behavior would be null. We can obviously also get the is valid information and to confirm that this is a valid UUID and this is not valid UUID in our case. If you are doing this frequently, if this is not a one-time operation, but you're actually, by any reasons, need to do this check more frequently, more than once, you can obviously put this check into a proper function, simple isValidUID, right? Where you are basically doing the same operation. So you are returning either true or false based on the provided text element. And this true or false is basically, again, a regex matching to your pattern. So at the end of the day, what this function will do, it will either bring you information that this particular value is a valid UID or it is not a valid UID. And in that case, your select is, let's say, much cleaner. So we are doing just the case when, and inside of this when we are doing this isValidUID execution of a function for a proper value with a text, and then we are doing the casting in case of this value is true or false with that particular value. As you can see, the result would be exactly the same. One of these elements is valid and the second one is not valid, right? So these are the options that you have in PostgreSQL. But are there any other options that you can use that I haven't mentioned? Of course, there are some options, and this will depend solely on your database that you are using, that you are working with. For instance, MySQL has an option of using predefined function for you, which is called isUUID here, where you are actually putting here like a string that is type of UID, and this will either return you 1 if the argument is a valid string from UID, 0 if the argument is not a valid UID, and null in case you are providing you null. So basically, sort of similar function that I've just created you in PostgreSQL that is actually available out of the box in MySQL. In SQL Server, however, you have another option, try convert. So this function actually will try, as it says, try to convert a value into a data type and will give you back the return, which is basically an information returns a value cast to the specific data type if the cast is successful. Otherwise, you will get back a null value. So answering your question, how it is in my database, well, I do not know what database are you using, right? But obviously, if you do have similar problems with casting to a data types and you are getting the errors, it is worth checking the documentation if there is any out-of-the-box solution for that in your database. If there is none, as in PostgreSQL, you can use regex matching, you can create a function out of it, and your problem will be solved. However, one more important thing to discuss here, and let's right now switch back from our editor. So the question is, should you even do it in your database? That should be the first question that you should be answering yourself. So here we are doing some custom code with regex that basically someone needs to maintain and someone needs to understand what it is doing. And the question should be, should I actually expect this type of values in my database from upper layers, or what has happened actually that my casting has failed, for instance? Is there some business logic change that we were not expecting as database modelers, database developers, data engineers, whoever, right? Or is there something that we haven't thought about from upper layers perspective, from our website, mobile app, front end, however we would call it, backend, wherever, right? So where the problem should actually be fixed. In cases that you have the control over the upper layers, you have the control over front and backend services, that's a perfectly reasonable place to think that this check might be done right there. However, if you don't have that possibility and only place where you could actually do the changes is the database, these should be your go-to solutions. But obviously, it shouldn't be your one-stop shop. The first thing that you would do, you will write your own function. First, analyze, check where the problem is coming from, what options do you have to solve it, and then try to solve it in the best possible way, one of which is basically using regex SQL for this one in PostgreSQL. Thank you very much. That's all in this video. See you next time. Bye bye.